It's your Tuesday daily delivery. I'm Michael Rand. Happy to be back for another day. Hope you guys are having a good one out there as well. Good show today. Andrew Krammer from the Tribune joins me in a little bit. It's Dobbs Mania, Joshua Dobbs Mania. We got to get to the film review of how he played on Sunday. His first start for the Vikings, 27-19 win over the Saints. Looked awfully good, especially in that first half, making plays with his arm, making plays with his legs. And Andrew and I will kind of take a look at what the Vikings did to design things in his favor, to kind of work in Joshua Dobbs' favor, to play to his strengths, as it were, because he's a much different quarterback, obviously, than Kirk Cousins. Gives them a different look back there, especially with his ability to make plays with his legs. So Andrew and I will get into that, as well as the continued ascent of the Vikings defense and everything Brian Flores is doing and continued to do against the Saints. Keith Rashad will join me for Vikings poetry here in just a little bit. 4 beautiful haikus, if you will, haikus in Vikings form, to kind of properly frame what is going on here. 5-game winning streak. I still don't believe that. I just still don't understand how they have done this all without Justin Jefferson. 2 of these games now without Kirk Cousins. They were 1-4 and had just lost their best player for several weeks at least. They knew while they were 1-4 that Jefferson was going on injured reserve, and we were all talking about, hey, let's trade everybody, trade Danielle Hunter, tank the rest of the season, win 3 or 4 games and get yourself your high draft pick, your quarterback. And they were like, nope. We're going to keep winning, and we're not going to stop winning. We're going to listen to Creed, and we're just going to win these football games, and there's nothing you guys can do about it. And you know what? It's turned the season into something interesting, something fun. I do still wonder what their long-term plan at quarterback is going to be and how this is all going to sort itself out. But in terms of team building, roster building, kind of making the necessary connections to feel like this is a team with some potential going forward. They've certainly done that this year. Kevin O'Connell, a masterful coaching job. Brian Flores, a masterful coaching job. So we'll get into all that here in just a little bit. Have a Wolves wild thought at the end of the show as well. First, though, what I miss. Man, it's been a tough week for PJ Fleck. Been a tough few weeks for PJ Fleck, I should say. What a weird year, right? Like, I didn't know what to make of this team coming into the season, this Gophers football team, just because they had lost a fair amount of talent from last year's team. You looked at the schedule and you said, Michigan on the schedule, Ohio State on the schedule. But then you looked at the rest of it and you're like, okay, they can still maybe compete. All the national kind of analysts were saying 7 wins, maybe 8 wins overall. Kind of a drop from 9, but I came into the year saying this was an important year. They needed to be at least good this year to kind of keep the momentum going from what they'd built in the last 3 or 4 years, and what they've been built in the last 3 or 4 years, again against a lot of soft Big Ten schedules, especially the last 2 years before this. But really, not to take anything away from it, you can only play who's on your schedule. They have been quite good in that regard because they've had 9 wins, and 11 wins in their last 3 full seasons. So this is not a PJ Fleck bashing session. This is not a fire PJ Fleck. That's not going to happen. He's had one real down year now in the midst of all this. That said, this year is troubling. This year is not keeping the momentum going in any way, shape, or form. It's been fits and starts. Even when they've won, they haven't looked great, and when they've lost, they've looked really bad, and now they're getting it from all sides. Jim Suhan, Star Tribune columnist, took them to task, and specifically took Fleck to task with a column in Tuesday's Star Tribune, writing, Fleck's buzzwords have not kept the 2023 Gophers from collapsing. They fell apart in the second half against a bad Northwestern team, were embarrassed by Michigan, imploded in the fourth quarter against a bad Illinois team, and were pounded by a bad Purdue team. Fleck has made this program all about him. His players have been asked to stand when he enters a room and are left to parrot his cliches from training camp to post-game interviews. Those post-game interview sessions have prompted questions toward the coach about the direction of his backsliding program. Maybe Fleck could learn from some of his Minnesota peers and treat his players more like equals and less like indentured servants and comport himself more like an employee than a king. Getting it from all sides, because I was thinking, man, like what a weird year, what a weird time for the Gophers. Give up 49 points to Purdue, over 600 yards to Purdue the other day, have the temerity to pin at least a significant amount of it on depth at linebacker. And I get it. This is college, not the pros. You don't have all the players in the world ready to go. It's not always next player up, next man up. If there's a difference, there's a big difference between, players with, 5 years of experience and barely any experience. I get that. I understand that, but that is not enough to explain 600 yards and 49 points, and especially stood in contrast to the Vikings on Sunday when the Vikings were, winning without their starting quarterback, winning without two of their top receivers, winning without a lot of the depth that they had come to enjoy for much of the year. A lot of the starters, I should say, winning with the depth they have now come to enjoy. No Jefferson, no Cousins, no KJ Osborne. They lost Alexander Madison during the game. Like, they've had injuries left and right, and they have just kept on rolling through the schedule with a 5-game winning streak. So the Gophers in a weird spot, right? 5-5. 27.5 point underdogs going into Ohio State this weekend. It's a name your score game. That's, that is what it is. You'd like them to be closer to Ohio State at this point in their journey, but that is what it is. Now, the last game of the year will be against Wisconsin. That will likely be for bowl eligibility. That will likely be for bragging rights, all this stuff. They could win that game, have beaten Nebraska, Iowa, and Wisconsin this season, and it will still feel like a bad year. What a weird year. What a weird year that would be if they do indeed beat Wisconsin in that finale. And I'm not saying they will, but Wisconsin definitely gettable. They are not a good team this season. They just got beat by Northwestern as well. So we'll see where it all ends up. Where it is right now is not good. PJ Fleck getting it from all sides, and there's not a whole lot he can do to save things right now.
Grand Casino would like to take a moment and salute the true football fan. The passion, the hope, the anticipation, that incomparable feeling of winning. Grand Casino would also like to take a moment to remind you that you can find all that anticipation, thrill, and winning at Grand Casino. Grand Casino, let your story begin.
Let's review the film with Vikings writer Andrew Krammer on today's show. Interesting things to look at this week in the first start for Josh Dobbs, Andrew, and just some new wrinkles in the offense. And of course, why wouldn't this be one of the hottest teams in the NFL right now, right? 5-0 without Justin Jefferson, 2-0 without Kirk Cousins. The train just keeps moving next man up, but really it's only next man up if the guys who are coming in can do the job and if the coaches are putting him in that kind of position.
Yeah, this was a great game for Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, certainly looking down at it and seeing his acquisition this year, Josh Dobbs midseason throwing to last year's midseason acquisition, TJ Hawkinson for a record 10 catches, 125 yards. And the amazing thing is that they're doing this with Dobbs scrambling, moving around, buying time, doing and looking like they've practiced together much longer. And Kevin O'Connell said after the game, he was asked what is more impressive, Josh doing what he did this week with a full week of preparation, but also a defense that's ready for him versus what he did in Atlanta. And Kevin O'Connell said, no question, Atlanta was far more impressive. But what you're seeing them do here in this game and what you saw them do against the Saints is scramble around, and TJ's sitting in a hole in a zone, and Dobbs knows where to look for him and find him on a critical third down conversion like they did in the first half. Those are the kind of things you see, quarterback, tight end, wide receiver combos that practice together far longer than these two guys have. And I know they've done some workout privately in Nashville, but that's like one-off, two-off kind of things in the summer. This is not what we're talking about in terms of building a true rapport. So that is incredibly impressive that they're looking like it's on schedule. They're looking like it's comfortable in rhythm with a guy that still, again, just showed up 2 weeks ago. And that's a credit to Josh Dobbs. It's a credit to Kevin O'Connell for adjusting the game plans, the offense to him in some ways. to get more out of that running ability that we'll talk about. It's just been amazing. I think at one point Dobbs started that game 18 for 22, incredible too through the air.
Yeah, I want to get into some of the specifics. I want to get into the O'Connell talking about Dobbs after the game. And obviously, you're going to be happy after a win, happy after the first half, especially that Dobbs played, and, got conservative a little bit in the second half. But here's Kevin O'Connell talking about Dobbs and his mobility and kind of what that means. And I was definitely interested in seeing what a mobile quarterback might do for this offense. It sounds like Kevin O'Connell is intrigued too. Let's listen to this.
You can start to feel like, hey, I can call anything on this call sheet, but then, I want to be smart. I want to be making sure that the calls reflect, my intentions of trying to attack certain looks. And then when Josh makes a play, it's a huge, huge bonus. And what I love is just, how all of our guys, are finishing those plays. You see when he finds TJ on that scramble, who'd you see down there barreling through the pile? Probably Dalton Reisner, if my memory serves me right. So our guys are, they understand now it's whistle to whistle, and we might be playing through the echo of it a little bit more on unique things that maybe we didn't before when we were, not that we didn't have mobility at the position, but Kirk was playing as well as anybody in this league, really ripping apart coverage and attacking things and kind of running everything. Josh in 2 starts has kind of shown us what mobility, in addition to what we do offensively, can do for us in this tough time where we're trying to overcome the loss of a guy like Kirk.
Okay, Andrew, what do you make of that? Obviously, we're not throwing Kirk Cousins under the bus or anything like that, but it sounds like this is probably kind of fun for O'Connell to have something different to kind of have to work through, right?
Yeah, it was right away, too, in a critical third down in that game of his first start. They go to the read option in the first half. And that's design. That's the coaches sitting back throughout the week and saying, this guy is incredibly mobile. We just saw it in Atlanta. How can we leverage that to our advantage? And when they can't run the ball on 3rd and 3 for a first down, why not fake it to the running back and have the quarterback run it? And that affects much more than just the running game. It affects the passing game. It affects everything. And O'Connell and the Vikings are seeing this. And I think coaches are schematic, right? And especially West Coast offense coaches. And it's a specific type. And not to get too far down the road, but these guys generally have a system and they understand the skill sets needed to get the most out of it. And O'Connell has probably dreamed about what Anthony Richardson would have looked like in this Vikings offense and how they can use the mobility. It's entirely different to see it in action, see it through their passing plays, their play action plays, their rollouts, seeing him scramble, seeing how he affects the route patterns and how receivers react to him. They didn't have that in LA with Matthew Stafford.
Right.
While he's somewhat mobile, it's not that, certainly at that age. O'Connell didn't have that when he was in Washington necessarily with the quarterbacks he had there post Robert Griffin. So this was something that I think they're learning now. And O'Connell said that in that quote, that we're seeing what mobility can do in addition to what our scheme does. And that's something that Kirk Cousins just never offered. And I asked TJ Hawkinson after the game, how much are you guys practicing the scramble drill now? Because before and then now, post Josh Dobbs, and he just laughed, and all he would say is, it's an emphasis now. So they're adjusting the way they practice, they're adjusting the plays themselves. This is a collective effort that is incredibly impressive.
So let's get into some specifics of what they did. You mentioned the read option. They did the direct snap to Ty Chandler for the goal line touchdown. I think that was their first touchdown of the game. They tried Dobbs on a fake and then a keeper to kind of ice the game. He slips. He doesn't get the first down. But that was a lot of key situations. They're not just saying, hey, if it's not there, try to go make a play with your legs. They're designing stuff right off the bat. And I like this about O'Connell. They're trying things that they obviously haven't practiced that much. Like they said, they just put in that direct snap to Chandler this week. If they think it can work and they feel like they've got it practiced enough, they'll just go ahead and try it.
Yeah, and entering that game, I had asked offensive coordinator Wes Phillips during his media availability, would you consider running Dobbs in a read option or something? And he laughed and said, you never know, we might do it, but we want to keep him upright. And I think in a world where the Vikings have a good running game, let's say it's Dalvin Cook, Alexander Mattison running like it's 2019 again, I don't know if they're doing this. I don't know if they are putting Josh Dobbs in that line of fire because this is the last guy they've got now at quarterback. They've already lost their starter. So I think this is a necessity thing. I think they realize they have to because they don't have a good running game. They only did it, as you mentioned, those couple 2 or 3 times. It really wasn't that often, but it's one of those things in his back pocket, Kevin O'Connell's, as a play caller, that he's going to pull out in some key moments, like that late game scenario you mentioned where he falls down, the early third down where you then make the defense think about it the rest of the game. And Garrett Bradbury, too, he said something after the game about Josh's mobility that really stood out. He said it's not just the designed runs. When he scrambles the way he does, it affects a defense pass rush. They can't just tee off on a guy who they think is going to be a stationary target. He said the Saints like to do a lot of twists and stunts that he didn't say this, but truthfully, the Vikings do struggle with these when defenses, start moving their linemen around and knifing through one way and the other. He said the Saints couldn't do that because they had to account for the rush lanes and try to keep Josh in the pocket. They started spying him with a linebacker, so they weren't blitzing as much. This contributed to him being sacked just once in that game. And Garrett said that was the one time the Saints really all out blitzed us. Yeah. So Josh's mobility is affecting so many things about this offense that's kind of helping them stay on schedule. And then add to the fact that they are just playing better. There weren't as many drop passes. There weren't as many penalties. No operational penalties. Again, the guys around the quarterback are playing better than they were at times, as we've talked about with Kirk earlier in the season. So you put all that together and you get a team that blows them out, blows the Saints out in the first half.
Yeah, and that feels like it's almost like the backup goalie scenario where the team knows, like, hey, they just brought in someone new. Maybe this isn't the starter. We have to be even that much better because this guy isn't going to be there to kind of save the day. And maybe there's some of that going on too. But to your point about Dobbs, he seems to have a pretty good feel for not just like running and escaping, but like sliding, moving, like knowing kind of a good feel for the rush. And I don't know if that's something that you can necessarily be taught, but he kind of seems like he's got a good kind of understanding or feel of like starting to get a little hot over here. I got to slide this way. Okay, now it's really getting, I got to spin out and go this way, see if I can make a play, and does a pretty good job of not just taking off, but like that play to Hawkinson where, he starts to run, but sees Hawkinson open, converts that play and, does it with his feet to get out of trouble, but still throws the ball. There's some good things that he does, just breaking out of pressure when he's not even necessarily running.
Yeah, he's been doing this for some time too. He's been doing this since Pop Warner, north in the suburb north of Atlanta. He grew up and he was a running back to start his football career before he moved to quarterback. And at Tennessee, his breakout game in 2000, I think it would have been 14, when he took over for Nathan Peterman of all people.
Oh, wow.
At Tennessee. At South Carolina against Steve Spurrier, he ended up having like 200, 300 yards rushing somewhere in there on top of 150 yards passing. Like this guy's always leaned on his legs. He's always been incredibly mobile. He's always caught people by surprise because he doesn't look like, you don't always see the big kind of highlight runs that you see from some other incredibly mobile quarterbacks, but he's also hard to bring down. He's big. He's got the short area burst too that gets away from people. You don't see too many quarterbacks gain distance in between defenders the way he does. It's funny because it's just easy to forget because we've never seen it at the NFL level outside of a little bit at Arizona the first half of this season because he didn't play. He didn't play for his first 6-7 years in the NFL. So we have not been exposed to Josh Dobbs as NFL fans and observers. And you talk to people in his past and they say, this is who he is. He's always done this kind of stuff.
Yeah. And you did a big piece on him for Sunday's paper. And, we all wrote about him this week. He's the big story. And you're kind of wondering like, man, is this going to be like a flash in the pan, the 1 week story? And the next thing you know, it's, he comes crashing down to earth. And I think there was some element of concern about that. Now that he's done it for a second week, it was his first start, but really second week of playing most of the snaps. And there was a week where he prepared a team where a week where a defense prepared for him. Does it feel not like completely sustainable, but feel like it's slightly, we know what his strengths are more now. We've seen another 60 minutes. Feels like he's not going to be perfect, but you see what he can do the rest of the year if it's him.
Yeah, and you've got confidence that the Vikings are going to adjust what they do week to week to fit him. And I think they're going to struggle when they face defenses that tackle better and keep up with mobile quarterbacks better. There were some plays like his rushing touchdown was just incredible. Like you don't see those kind of plays too often. But I guess the Saints do struggle with mobile quarterbacks. I guess this is not the first time this year that they've had a quarterback run on them. Dennis Allen talked about that, the head coach, after the game, and saying that we had trouble containing the quarterback again. So I think you're going to see better defenses match up with him. I don't know if necessarily that's Denver or Las Vegas coming up, or Chicago even, but when you get to face better teams in December and January, it's maybe not always going to look that fluid. And frankly, the passing game was just clicking. Everything was, outside of, I think Madison might have dropped a pass there one time, but there really wasn't much wrong with that passing game too. That's not always going to look like that. So I do think we're due for some regression. The Vikings are at some point. And I do think that there were some matchup advantages that the Vikings had in terms of his scrambling ability. But what you have to take out of this is that Josh Dobbs is playing with absolute confidence, in rhythm from having started every game to start the year with Arizona. And then this coaching staff is clearly willing to try new things in November with Ty Chandler, with Josh Dobbs. So that's got to give you confidence as a Vikings fan, certainly.
Let's talk a little bit more about Chandler before we move to the defense. He gets a lot of opportunities, and certainly a lot more as the game wore on because Madison goes out with a concussion. But even before that, there was, he came on for a series. He had a burst like right away where he had like 10 or 11 yards on a run. He had that direct snap touchdown. He had another touchdown called back. That was a nice run. They got O'Neal for holding on a play that really would have put the game away probably. But seems like they've got something there. I also saw that he was maybe not always lined up in the right place. The Dobbs is telling him, go to this side, or, you're supposed to be over here, things like that. So I get maybe some of the hesitancy that coaches have maybe had to put him on the field all the time. But as a runner, he's definitely got some talent and kind of brings the kind of fresh legs and juice that they could maybe use there.
Yeah, he's one of their fastest players. And you see that in practices. Their GPS tracking data clocks that out. You almost start to think that, hey, maybe Kevin O'Connell should have gotten him involved a little sooner. And I understand we get, as reporters covering this team every day, we get so close to it that when you hear the explanation for why a guy like Ty Chandler's not playing, you're like, okay, well, better, right? But then you see him play a couple times and you're like, hey, this guy's got some talent that you see other teams scheme up roles for a guy like that a little more creatively, or a little more taking on a little bit more risk. And he might get you a false start or an illegal formation, but you know what? He might break you a 60-yard run, right? Because he can do that if you mix it up on a jet sweep or something like that. And even though he took on a much larger role, obviously, in this game, and showed that he can handle it. He didn't have too many errors, and you can kind of trust the kid to grow a little bit with those opportunities. It's explosive. It's the type of running that you saw Dalvin Cook kind of give them in that home run ability, even though Ty probably doesn't have quite the elusiveness that peak Dalvin Cook had. I want to see more of him. And I think with Madison in the concussion protocol, we might end up seeing more of him in Denver.
We sure probably will. Be curious to see what we see from the defense in Denver. Russell Wilson's playing a little bit better lately. They seem to be not fixed, but he's had better games this year. You've got Sean Payton there trying to solve that thing, and then their defense still has some playmakers. Seems like they're starting to kind of right their ship a little bit. They're still 3-5, so they're not great, but that's an opportunity. And on the other side of the ball, the Vikings defense, in this game holds the Saints to 19. That's a good number. They get the turnovers they need at the end. The touchdowns the Saints got were two pretty impressive catches. I don't know what more Byron Murphy could have done on either of those plays. So they got to feel pretty good about where they're at, and kind of the mixing of, either 5 or more or 3 or less, like we've talked about before. Like they really they very rarely just send their base, and they're going to show you 6 or 7, and it might be 6 and it might be 3, and it's got to be confusing for a quarterback.
Yeah, and they're playing really well. They're tackling really well. They themselves went 8 quarters, I believe, as a defense without getting penalized until that really weird Danielle Hunter hands to the face where it was his helmet that came off.
Yeah.
Daniil said after the game, the ref didn't know what to say to me. He's like, I walked over to the ref and the ref just was silent. He's like, he had no idea what to say. It's like, yeah, because you screwed up.
He said, we want to keep this game close, so we called a penalty.
But they're playing incredibly well. Hunter's got his 11th sack in that game. They lose Jordan Hicks early in that game, and it doesn't matter because Ivan Pace, an undrafted rookie, an incredible find by this front office and development by this coaching staff, he steps in and shows that he can be a full-time player, barely leaving the field. The first play after Hicks left, it was Josh Metellus actually who replaced him in blitzes on third down over center. I mean, to have a safety, to be able to just say, hey, our safety, who's our nickel slot kind of hybrid guy, you know what, we just lost our team captain and play caller in the middle of the field. You go replace him. It's incredible to have that versatility. It's really what Brian Flores has preached since he got here, and you've seen it kind of come to fruition and to life here in moments like that where you lose a key player like Jordan Hicks and you still make a huge play with the other guy replacing him. This defense is, I think I saw, was like top 5 in a lot of metrics in this last 5-0 stretch here. They're playing great, and no, it's not Patrick Mahomes, it's not Justin Herbert. They're not playing amazing offenses right now, but they're building confidence and they believe that they can play with anybody.
And it's like, coaching can be overblown. It's this kind of like nebulous term, but you see it so clearly with Flores and certainly O'Connell these last few games where they've had to make all these adjustments without Jefferson and then Cousins. But like, you see like the impact of coaching. They don't have a ton of new personnel. They don't have a lot of known personnel, but the defense is just so much different and better this year than it was last year. And that's not like even a knock on Donatel. That's more of just like what Flores brings to the table.
Yeah, it is. It's a much more diverse scheme, much thicker playbook, much more modernized one, much more aggressive, sets the tempo. I think I heard Flores say once, when a quarterback or when an offense is feeling that pressure, it limits their playbook quite a bit and what we have to worry about. I mean, that kind of an attack mentality that they bring and are executing, it's been successful even in some games here where you can still manage to be within one score of the Super Bowl champion Chiefs. And Daniil Hunter had something to say that he wasn't throwing dirt on Donatel necessarily, but it made me think about that. After the game, I'd asked him just about seeing these young defenders like Pace, Metellus, these young guys underneath them grow and make these plays. And he said, it's good to see these guys in roles, in positions that they were meant to be all along and finding out what they're good at. I think that does say something about where they were at last year. Yeah. And maybe that did sidetrack some of the development that we could have seen a year ago.
Yeah, Harrison Smith had some good things to say about Flores and O'Connell too. I mean, it just seems like they're in a good spot with all of that. And, they were 1-4 at one point. I mean, this season was going nowhere. This is just, it's weird. I hope it's not Creed that's doing this, because then we're going to have to hear a lot more Creed, but something's going on here. And I don't know. I mean, I just don't know where they go from here with Dobbs, if it comes crashing back to earth at some point, but they've kind of got something going here that's hard to define.
It is. It really is. That's why I wasn't going into this game. I didn't know what to think in terms of predicting. I mean, we talked about it on the podcast, and I think I said I was going to pick them to win just because logic has been defied. I tried to apply logic and say, yes, there's going to be a regression to the mean with Dobbs, and a tough Saints defense will be able to contain him and all these things. And the Vikings are going to play more like they did at the beginning of the year and kind of level out. And they just haven't. And it's because of that. I don't know if it's because of that locker room vibe, whatever it is, the culture that they talk about, but the players certainly buy into it. The coaches do. And they certainly believe there's something to the wind beneath their wings, I guess, that they've got going on.
Well, we'll talk about it more next week after that Sunday night game against Denver. We'll see if Kirk Cousins has tweeted again by then. He hasn't tweeted since a while back. It was after the first Kirkless win. He tweeted, I didn't see anything on Sunday about let's go boys, way to go. So we'll see how he's doing at some point too. But Andrew, appreciate it as always, and we'll talk again soon.
Sounds good, Mike. Thanks.
Appreciate Andrew hopping on. A little bit of a postscript to that. Speaking of the defense, old friend Anthony Barr back for the Vikings, giving them some linebacker depth with Jordan Hicks looking like he'll be out for at least a little while. Injury suffered in that Saints game. So Anthony Barr back with the Vikings. Hadn't been playing this year, was with Dallas last year. Certainly a veteran. He was 2014 draft class, so this would be his 10th season in the NFL. See if he's needed or just there for depth, for an emergency, but definitely someone with which a lot of his teammates still are familiar. I'm sure Harrison Smith, Daniil Hunter, those guys all still have a lot to say about Anthony Barr. So we'll see if he adds anything to that mix. They can certainly use the depth, though. It's poetry time on Daily Delivery with my good friend.
Best time ever.
Best time ever with my good friend Keith Rashad. I was musing to you before we begin here that the whimsy has returned. We talked about last year being the season of whimsy. The first 5 games of this season were certainly anything but whimsical, but now 5 wins in a row, 5-0 without Justin Jefferson, 2-0 without Kirk Cousins. They keep losing guys and they keep winning games. What's going on here?
I think the key is just to trade everybody, right?
Trade everybody.
At least, give everybody a week off, right? Yeah. Just lose a few more starters, and it's a Super Bowl team.
I think the key is poetry, because since we started the poetry segment, they're awfully good. I guess that Zimmer year doesn't count. Kevin O'Connell certainly appreciates the poetry, I do think. So, Vaiku number 1, if you'd be so kind.
That is the difference, right? That's really the difference, is that you could see Kevin O'Connell reading a book of poetry, and you can just barely imagine Mike Zimmer knowing how to read.
You could picture Mike Zimmer gritting his teeth through like 32 seconds of a poetry reading.
or just trying to get through a blog post. just trying his best.
Leaves of grass, Okay, go ahead.
All right. 2 different halves. Sunshine blotted out by dark. Which one is real?
I mean, I don't know if either one of them's probably the true reality, but I think they kind of got conservative in the second half. And the problem is, even though Dobbs is a running quarterback, when you have a big lead, you want to be able to run the ball, and they can't run the ball. Like it's obviously safer generally to keep it on the ground, to be able to pick up some first downs and chew up a drive with a bunch of safe plays. But if they're going to be effective, they can't do it by handing it off, because it's always going to be second, and it feels like it's going to be 2nd and 8 or worse if the other team knows they're going to run it. So I think the first half showed their potential, and the second half showed that they're still a little bit afraid of truly trusting everybody that's in there right now.
Well, I think that's part of it. And you also have to ask the question of, are they essentially going to revert to what we see pretty much every football regime and football coach do when they get to a certain point, right? That at a certain point in a game, a team becomes scared of losing as opposed to trying to win.
Yeah.
And so is that ultimately the explanation for what happened in that game, that they did just get conservative? Or do we have a situation where a guy is hot and, maybe started to cool off a little bit the longer the game went, and who is just going to trend in that direction, right? And you're right. This goofy team somehow is trying its best to make this season more whimsical than the last, right? I can only imagine what next season will be like.
Right. I don't know what they're going to do next year, but I'm ready for it. But yeah, I don't know what it is. They I don't know which one of them is closer to the truth. I mean, certainly Joshua Dobbs is a career backup, right? He does some things differently for them, obviously, than Kirk Cousins does, especially with running the ball. So you do wonder, like, at some point, is a team are they going to figure it out, right? It's almost like a relief pitcher comes in baseball, and he like gets guys out for a few weeks because nobody has seen his stuff, and then you see his stuff, and you're like, okay, this is how we beat this guy. I don't know what's going to happen. He seems like he does enough with his arm and his legs to feel like he's going to be at least decent. But that first half, he was on a heater in that first half.
It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And then it all just petered out.
It did. And I think O'Connell took some of that on himself. And I don't know how much of that is a coach wanting to keep his players up and how much of it is him having some regret
No,
over
the coach took a blame in a victory. Oh, how shocking that he decided to throw himself in front of the bus in a game that they won. Wow, wow.
I think
has that ever happened before?
I think some of it's true, though. I think he probably has some self-doubt about how he managed that game, that it got kind of close at the end. Like, the Saints were one possession away a few different times from having a chance to tie it at least, and had one more Hail Mary that was a pretty well thrown Hail Mary too to try it at the very end after they had to punt one more time. But I don't know what to expect. All I know is you at least saw like the potential for this offense. I think is that like the ceiling in that first half was way higher than you could have imagined when Cousins went down, right? Like you just imagine, hey, can they find someone that can not completely screw it up? And Dobbs at least has the ability to do more than not screw it up.
Agreed. It's amazing. It's really amazing. Let's hope he can do what Case Keenum and Randall Cunningham couldn't.
And go all the way to the Super Bowl.
Finish it off.
Finish the job. Okay. Vaiku too, please.
I want the Vikings to marry Brian Flores. Put a ring on it.
It would be nice, right? Like, the problem is as he gets better and better, right? Like the always the worry in Minnesota is like as soon as a coach does well, is he going to leave? And Flores has already been a head coach. He's a really good defensive coach. Man, is he a good defensive coach? Yes. I would sure like for him to be here for multiple years at least, even if it was just 2 years and they had like the Brian Flores protege in waiting after that. That would be fine with me because he deserves another chance to be a head coach. But man, that guy can coach some defense.
Is there any way to make him and O'Connell co-head coaches? Give them both just a ton of money and just let them be co-head coaches. The thing is I do like Kevin O'Connell. I do think he does have his hiccups, right?
Yeah.
There's sometimes been some time management stuff and what have you. That being said, he has demonstrated some real ability, especially this season, that he could somehow bring whimsy to this season.
Right.
Is seemingly impossible, but he has done it. That being said, this doesn't happen without Brian Flores tightening that defense up.
Correct.
And they were maybe not as good as they could have been early on in the season, but they seem to be getting better, right?
Yes.
And they seem to be figuring a few things out. And it's a real risk and reward, right? But it's seems to mostly work out. And, when we get to the playoffs and there are actual good quarterbacks flinging the ball around, it's likely going to be a different story. But in terms of building whimsy for a season that shouldn't be this way, he has worked as many miracles and perhaps even more than O'Connell has.
I agree. I mean, you think about, their first 2 wins of the year, which are important, even if they didn't feel important at the time, like Carolina and Chicago, like those are absolutely won by the defense. I think they had defensive touchdowns in both those games. They gave up only 13 points in each of those games. The defense was really good against San Francisco. They were really good against the Packers. Like the offense has definitely picked it up kind of in concert with the defense, but I think the defense has been the better side of the ball for the majority of this season, and that was completely unexpected coming in.
Absolutely. And we've talked about this before, both on this segment and in real life for 35 years.
Yeah, right.
That it has never seemed to sync up for this team. Right? They've never had a good offense at the same time that they've had a good defense. It's usually been one or the other. Yeah. Right. And to what extent are we seeing at least the possibility of these things merging together? It maybe not necessarily just this season, but if you could keep Flores for another 2 seasons and O'Connell is able to, and Kwesi reshapes the offense a little bit more in the image of whatever they want, and they sign Jefferson, which still is inexplicable as to why they've done this to this point, right? We might have finally that marriage of 2 good sides of the ball at the same time.
Yeah. They still need more talent on defense. They just haven't invested in it in the draft, but they're either finding guys and or developing guys, and probably both, where, it hasn't been the high draft picks. It's guys like Josh Metellus, Ivan Pace Jr., and, Cam Bynum, like guys like that who are not high draft picks, maybe don't have the highest pedigree, but are playing huge roles right now. Now, if they could only figure out the special teams, Vaiku 3, please.
Another good win, but unsatisfactory. I hate Sean Payton.
So that's next, right? That's the Broncos.
So when we were growing up,
yep,
the Bears were the team to hate. They
yep.
had the Super Bowl shuffle and Jim
yep.
McMahon and that amazing defense. They were the team to hate. You moved to the cities first, and I moved a couple of years after.
Yep.
At a point where the Packers were ascending, and they
yes.
became the team to hate.
For sure. Yep.
Right?
Definitely.
Somewhere along the line in the last 15 years or so, the Saints have become not necessarily the top of the list, but definitely in the top 5, probably top 3 of teams that I've just hated.
It wasn't just somewhere. It was 2009. That was exactly when it happened.
Well, yeah, yes, it was. It was exactly, yes, you're right. That's exactly when with the stupid bounty gate.
Yes.
And when that team cheated its way to a victory in the NFC Championship game, where it would have been the one Vikings team that would have won the Super Bowl.
Yes.
Because the Saints went on to beat a very lackluster Colts team.
Yes.
And we can think back to 98 and that 15-1 team, but they lost to a 14-2 team in the NFC Championship game, which then subsequently lost to a 14-2 team in the Super Bowl.
Yes.
Right. So the idea that they would have won that if Gary Anderson had just made the field goal is maybe not as realistic as we want to believe. Sean Payton and that cheating team stole the Super Bowl of our lifetime. Yeah. They stole the one, which would have been so delicious with Brett Favre actually winning it, right?
Yes.
Having then won as many Super Bowls for Minnesota as he did for Green Bay.
Yes.
It would have been just immaculate, the best thing ever.
But instead they stole it.
They stole it. And Sean Payton was at the helm, and he has just been a jerk ever since. And it was so great when he was doing the skull chant and then got burned. Got absolutely
the Minneapolis Miracle.
The Minneapolis Miracle. It was just the best thing ever. So beating the Saints feels really good. They are a top 3 hateable team in my book and have been for 15 years, at least top 3. But it doesn't quite feel quite the same without that jerk in town, without that goofball, because beating him was extra special.
So they get to maybe next week you can talk about that then, because they get a chance to beat Sean Payton next Sunday.
Well, maybe, but it's also kind of like, you break up with somebody and then they start dating somebody again who's clearly much less than you are. And so you're just like, okay, all right.
If that's what you wanted, that's fine.
You took a step down. It's all yours. You go right ahead.
Really? That's you. Okay, that's what you wanted? Okay, Vaiku 4, please.
All right. A man's heart rises, resurrected by hope. I love you, Josh Dobbs.
It's just a nice little love letter is what that was. A nice little way to end the Vaiku segment. He's kind of fun to watch. More than kind of. Like he seems like there's a certain like reciprocal energy going on where, by the end, I think people were, even the Kirk Cousins doubters were coming around to the idea that he was a pretty good quarterback, that he was an above average quarterback who was playing at a top 10 quarterback level this year. That said, I think it's also always fun to see something new, and it's fun to see something where it's different. And he does it differently than Cousins did, and that's fun.
It is fun, and he brings a different element. He brings an unpredictability that Kirk didn't have. Kirk could make plays when things broke down a little bit, right? And again, he is a truly amazing quarterback, but there's always a talk about him being on schedule or and was not real good with the improvisation part of the game. And so to see somebody who's injecting some energy, and early on in the season, right, we talked, it would have been great if they had gone 2 and 15 and gotten the
franchise quarterback,
And I'm not saying Josh Dobbs is this, right? But he just really does bring a joyful, different element. And there's actually hope in the season again. There's actually, in how far, we could ask the question, how much hope can you have, right? Is it enough just to sneak in the playoffs? So we'd be happy with that. Could we aspire to something more, especially since we imagine or we believe, despite what history tells us, that the team will get healthier? We know Jefferson's coming back at some point. Osborne's coming back at some point. That the offensive line is performing very well in a way that we haven't seen for a very long time. How much hope can you have? And whatever that limit is for you or anybody else listening, at the very least, there is that hope now, right? That you can aspire to something, that you can imagine them making the playoffs and at least making a little bit of noise because they've beaten good teams now, and we presume that they're going to get better because of their injury situation.
Who would have imagined that 5 weeks ago? It's just a total narrative change from 1-4 to now, and it's bizarre because they're doing it without Jefferson. Like I don't understand exactly what's happening, and maybe that's where whimsy comes into play.
Yep, whimsy.
Yeah, that Denver game, by the way, suddenly doesn't look quite as appetizing on the schedule. Denver started the year terribly. They've won 3 in a row, though, and I believe wins over Kansas City and Buffalo in that mix. The Buffalo win was the Monday night game, an ugly, weird game. Denver wins it with a field goal in the final seconds. They got a second crack at that field goal after Buffalo had a penalty on the first try. So Denver wins that game. That's not an easy game anymore. That is a game against a team that is suddenly kind of getting weirdly hot, just like the Vikings. And we'll see which of these teams can stay hot in that game. Let's finish quickly with the cooler. It's in-season tournament time, baby. Wolves at Warriors tonight. Wolves just beat the Warriors 2 nights ago, but that was just a regular game. This is a regular game and a group play in-season tournament game. So Wolves are already 1-0 in the in-season tournament. Beat San Antonio the other night. They've got this one at Golden State, then they've got a couple home games later in the season. We'll see. I don't know if this matters a whole lot, but it adds a little dimension. The court will look weird, will look kind of funny, and there will be a little bit extra at stake, I guess, for the players. So in-season tournament game tonight, brand new thing. If you're not used to this, if you're wondering why does the court look like that, why do they keep talking about the in-season tournament, that is happening tonight for the Wolves. The Wild, meanwhile, headed to Sweden. Probably a good time for them to be in Sweden after how poorly they've been playing. They need to take something there, bring something back that hasn't been there so far this year. That'll do it for me today. Go for football talk coming up on Wednesday's show with Randy Johnson. Plenty of other stuff coming up later this week. Should have probably Sarah McClellan sometime from Sweden talking Wild, and plenty of other stuff the rest of the week. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Back at it again tomorrow.